closely with them because part of it is you have to get rid of a diesel bus. So they had the diesel bus we were getting that to get rid of. We actually, in this case, for this one bus, we purchased the bus ourselves. So I had to take it to the board and, get their approval. The grant paid 75%, and that was for the bus, and we got a vehicle to grid charger. So there was a lot involved. We have a spot for one bus. We put it right by our Prairie Trails School, which is our net zero energy school. So it kind of showcases that part too. But getting the charger, it needs a concrete foundation. It needs higher electricity than we actually had. We had to get a transformer. We had to have the electrician in. The grant didn't cover those costs. It covered the charger itself, but not those costs. So that took a bit to get all that set up. The bus itself, I think, took at least a year for us to get. I think they're a little faster now, and now the Lion Joliet plant's up and running. You can probably get it faster. So we finally we had the charger in. We finally got the bus back last May. We were hoping to get it on a run, but then we discovered there was more work there too. I think the software didn't quite work properly. We had to get Cummings out, help us with that. We went through quite a bit of different things, but we did get it up and running for the first day of school this year. It is doing our longest route. We have an agreement with Grand Prairie in our transportation contract that we get an offset for the cost. What would be the cost of the bus? The bus depreciated and maintenance and some things like that. So we worked out an agreement with them as far as the cost of that route, because they still have to pay they get the driver. They actually do maintain the bus, but maintenance is less on an electric bus. We've been working, it charges up every day, but we do not yet have the interconnection with ComEd. And I don't believe ComEd yet has an agreement to get they're supposed to give us the revenue back, but I don't think that's all been worked out yet either. So we're still working on that end of it, but we do have kids riding the bus, even preschoolers at midday. So it's going well. Once they started running it, there haven't been too many issues, just some minor things that you might have with any bus when you're getting it up and running. When it comes to the federal grant, we did apply for the first rebate, and we also worked with Grand Prairie there. We don't want to own any more buses. We wanted them to own the bus. So we're looking right now at applying for the next round. And some kind of agreement, but it's getting a little complicated because we may have to go out to bid. We've had Grand Prairie for a long time and haven't been out to bid in a long time. So I'm not quite sure how this next round is going to work for us with that kind of part, without having that partnership. So questions? It's kind of my overview.
Okay, if nobody has any questions, then I think we can go forward. Susan, do you want me to start your slideshow?
Sure.
Okay.
First of all, I'd like to thank Lyndall Schuster. Lyndall is the Assistant Superintendent for Business Services for River Trails 26, which is a district located also in northern Illinois, in suburban Chicago, in the Mount Prospect area. Lyndall has had, as you can tell, personal experience with the process of seeking funding and getting an electric school bus going in very close proximity to C4 communities. And so her experience, I think, can be relevant to C4 communities. And so I really appreciate her being willing to share that with all of you today. So I'm going to give a little background on why a school district might be considering electric school buses. So let me start there, and then we'll go through some additional practical information on top of what Lyndall has already shared in terms of her experiences. So why electric school buses now? As many of you no doubt are aware, most of the school buses that move Illinois' 1 million children each day to and from schools are diesel, and they emit climate-forcing black carbon. It also turns out that a school bus ride for a child, although it's a relatively small percentage of their day, is likely, and in some cases, responsible for 33% of their daily exposure to pollution. So that's one reason we're urging this transition, is to get kids out of these diesel school buses. It also impacts the health of the drivers and the communities through which these buses are driven. And no small matter, there's now money on the table for electric school buses, which we will go through. But just to give you an overview, there's federal funding that's for which a rebate round is open right now. There are also tax credits, which for school districts can turn into direct pay for both the bus and the infrastructure. And there are in-state help available, potentially through another round of Illinois EPA funding, such as Lyndall got for their bus, and ComEd's future beneficial electrification plan implementation. Next slide, please. So a few more details on this. So again, why is diesel not the current preferred healthy mechanism to get school buses operating on? Asthma is now the #1 chronic disease among US children. Diesel is a trigger for asthma incidence. And for kids who are on wheelchairs, they're both the most vulnerable kids because of their underlying health conditions, but also are the most exposed. So these are especially situations where one would want to transition as early as possible. Next slide, please. We learned from the University of Michigan School of Public Health that getting kids out of old, dirty diesel school buses can save or prevent 14 million school day absences per year. We've also learned from the experts at Argonne National Lab nearby that each bus that's transitioned from diesel to electric can save over 10 tons of greenhouse gases per bus per year, or somewhere between 125 and 170 tons of greenhouse gases during the bus's life. So there's definitely, for C4 communities, all of whom we know are dedicated to working to improve climate, this is another rationale. Seat school buses that are electric also have the advantages of being quiet, as drivers now respond and report. The kids get to school in calmer. And there's, if you can move to the next slide, please, there's also starting to be evidence that this can improve children's teaching academic performance to not be exposed to both the noise and the fumes from diesel buses. Next slide, please. So one of the things we hear about, which is a legitimate concern, is the upfront cost of electric buses is still significantly higher than diesel, about 3 times as high. We're going to get into how to get over that upfront cost barrier is most of what we're going to be talking about today. But the good news is, and Lyndall mentioned this in her remarks, that the maintenance costs of electric school buses are significantly lower than diesel buses. Why? Because there are literally thousands of fewer parts to maintain. That's one reason. And the other reason is that the cost of electricity is less per mile than the diesel fuel. All of you who are operating diesel buses know how volatile diesel prices are. Electricity prices, by contrast, are both lower, but also much less volatile, so easier to plan for. And these are a couple of examples on this slide of savings that other school districts, especially the Twin Rivers one, but also others are experiencing already with cost savings. Next slide, please. This shows you a map of Illinois with school districts that have already been awarded electric school buses. They are not yet all in operation, but some of them are. And the reason we put this up is we'd be glad to connect you with, as we did with Lyndall today, with others who may have experience, but so you know you're not alone. This is still early technology, but you're not alone on this path. And so there are others, for instance, well, anyway, so next slide, please. The buses in Illinois to date have usually been funded as River Trails was with Illinois EPA VW money. That money has partially, but not entirely, been allocated for electric school buses. There's still more out there. We don't know when IEPA will next have a round of funding, but right now there is big federal money available. EPA put out the first 2 rounds of money for electric school buses last year and earlier this year in a rebate round and then a so-called grants round. I'll be glad to describe those. They are different, but right now the overall pot is there's a $5 billion program set up by the the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, otherwise IIJA. And that $5 billion program is a 5-year program of which we are in year 2. And half of that money is specifically allocated for electric school buses and half of it for so-called clean school buses, which can include electric. There's also money for some infrastructure that's not aimed at school buses, but could help. Next slide, please. The Inflation Reduction Act, which was a separate piece of legislation, also has money that can help school districts who apply for and get electric school buses and the related infrastructure. Specifically, while the language is called tax credits, and I know school districts don't pay taxes, that can be converted to what's called direct pay to school districts. And the amount of funding is also generous and substantial. A school district can get up to $40,000 direct pay, somewhat after buying an electric school bus per bus, and that's for any school district. If a school district is in what's considered by the Census Bureau a low income or non-urban area, it can also qualify for up to $100,000 toward the electric vehicle infrastructure, per charger, et cetera. So, and there's more details on that to come that haven't yet been released by the Census Bureau and the IRS, but that's what's coming. Next slide, please. I put this one in only because some of your communities may already be familiar with the NEVI program. We're not going to go through the details of this today, but this could also help with charging equipment in your community that the school bus might be able to use. So we can come back to that if there's time, but I just wanted to put out that there's other possibilities in some of these other large federal bills. Next slide, please. I'm going to skip this one so that the time we have, we can focus on the current round of EPA funding. So just last month, EPA opened up the second so-called rebate round of electric school bus and clean school bus funding. I wanted to say now to start, I mentioned earlier that EPA had done a rebate round last year and a grants round earlier this year. The terminology, first of all, is somewhat confusing. So let me say that you and I think about a rebate as something where we buy, let's say, some kind of battery and it says rebate available. And we pay for it. We keep our copy of the receipt and we mail it into the manufacturer, and eventually we get a check back. That is not the way EPA has done this rebate round. Happily, they listened to school districts last year when this program was being set up, and the rebate is actually upfront payment once one is awarded the funding. So the school district will not need to put money out up front for the school bus if it wins the award under the rebate round. The rebate round this year, well, first of all, I know that a couple of C4 communities applied for the last year's rebate round. Unfortunately, as to the best of our knowledge, they were waitlisted because there was overwhelming demand last year. EPA received nearly $4 billion in applications for the $500 million that it had advertised it was going to give out. This year, it's similarly said they're holding $500 million for this year's round of rebates, but they have kept the door open that it might be more if they similarly are overwhelmed by applications. Time will tell. They've made some changes that are important for districts to know. Last year, most of the money went to so-called prioritized communities. Under the law, there are 3 types of prioritized communities: rural, tribal, and so-called high need. Those each are defined, and the lists that EPA has used have changed a little bit from last year. High need basically is being used as school districts that meet the SAPE, small area income poverty estimate, list of having 20% or more students in poverty. Also, large school districts with a significant percentage of students in Title I Title I schools may self-certify as meeting the high need definition. My understanding is that this year, for this round, there are a few C4 communities that qualify as priority districts, those being 88, 89, 90, and 98. And the importance of prioritization is that if one wins an award, the priority districts get a larger chunk of change towards the bus than a non-priority district. But unlike last year, when most of the winners were from priority districts, EPA has changed the way it's going to do the lottery this year. And so non-priority districts actually have a much better chance this year of winning in the rebate round. The difference in money is that if one is a priority district and applying for an electric school bus of the largest types of school buses, one can get up to $345,000 for the bus and charger together. And the school district can decide how it wants to divide up the funding between the bus and the charger. Also, workforce training costs can be included within that $345,000. For a non-priority district, the total for this rebate round is $200,000 for the bus, charger, and other related costs. And EPA has allowed costs that it didn't allow last year, such as workforce training, to be included towards the total. Let's see. So what I've got here on the slide is to show you some of what is needed to fill out these applications. Let me first say that the rebate round applications are actually fairly simple. There are a few things that one should do before starting the application. The first thing is to make sure that one's sam.gov account is current and that one has that data is up to date, because when one starts the application and one puts in one's sam.gov the POC, the contact person, and their email, that will autofill large parts of the application. And it's actually really critical that one has one's sam.gov account up to date before starting, both because it makes the application easier, and frankly, getting the sam.gov account, if one doesn't have one, I assume most of the school districts have them, but they must be up to date. And once one has it and it's up to date, the application will flow.
Susan, can I just say something quickly?
Of
You
course.
said, just in case school districts don't know, if they had an account previously, they expire, correct?
They expire after a year. So good point, Colleen. Thanks for bringing that up. Much better to update before the 365 days are up, because one would have to start over again. As long as one does it within 365 days, it's a relatively simple process of updating. So thanks for that, Colleen. Another thing that one would want to do before starting an application is to assess one's current fleet. So how many buses, what types of buses are they, and what ages are the buses? And the reason for that is this is viewed by EPA as a replacement program. One is replacing an old diesel bus, for instance, with a new electric bus, for instance. And depending on what's in one's fleet, older buses, it's a one-for-one replacement. So a 2010 or older diesel bus must be scrapped. If one has a newer fleet of buses that are newer than that, they can be donated, scrapped, or sold. Again, on a one-for-one basis to get a new electric bus. This has been an issue for some districts, and we're glad to talk through some possible ways of creatively dealing with that requirement, but it is a requirement to scrap a bus. It doesn't necessarily have to be owned by the district now, but it does have to have been a bus that was in service somewhere, serving kids. Okay, so this is the reason I showed this one, is this saving and editing your information. No doubt many of you have filled out things online before and gotten frustrated, as certainly I have, with losing a form if not saving it in time and having to start over. So the reason I've got this page up is that if you work on the page and within 15 minutes you save it, it's saved and you'll be able to come back and edit it. If you don't touch the page within 15 minutes, it's you could lose it. But if you finish the page and go to the next page, that page is saved. So that's just a simple one. Next page, next slide, please. This is to show you that if you were to have been one of the districts that applied last year for either the rebate round or this year's earlier grant round, your older information would be in the system. And I bring that up because it will save you some time, and since this is a 5-year program, if you apply this time, you are able to apply for any round for which you're eligible. And I would think that all C4 communities are eligible, even if they aren't prioritized. Basically, the eligibility is broad for this program. So some of the information may more easily repopulate. That's why this slide is up. Next, please. So this, I mentioned earlier, the importance of prioritization has to do with, your both when the draw is in the lottery and how much money one gets. So these are just a couple of questions that are asked about one's prioritization, and you'll see there's drop-down menus. So there's a lot of this is very simple to fill out. Next slide. This one, wow, is this hard to read? Sorry about that. This gets up to the buses that you currently have in your fleet, and putting in the information that I mentioned earlier that you'd want to have assembled beforehand about which buses you're interested in replacing with a new electric. So you'll see that it asks about the VIN number, the manufacturer, the year, so that's what this form is. And you'll see on the bottom with the red arrow about the older buses being replaced first, and what's eligible to be replaced. Next slide, please. This is what the page will look like when you get to the new buses, the buses that you're interested in purchasing. Again, what type of fuel they have, who the manufacturer is, that sort of thing. Next slide, please. This one is about partnerships. It's hard to read. I'm sorry. I had trouble with the screenshots here. And about workforce development. If you intend to, and it's a good idea to be working with your staff to have them be aware upfront of your intentions of moving to electric or even trying an electric bus. We've heard from school districts around the country that when involving, for instance, their maintenance staff or their drivers or their mechanics, oftentimes there can be understandable concerns or reluctance if it's sort of a surprise. Oh, by the way, we've got this new electric bus. Involving them and thinking about their working conditions and how it might change their lives has often made for a very smooth transition instead. So this is just a box here to talk about, you know, what if any plans you've got, whether you've got, and there are now training programs available for the electrician aspects. Next slide. This looks like an overwhelming slide, but let me tell you what it is. This is basically a slide that the National Renewable Energy Lab put together. And I've got it in here for two reasons. It's to basically encapsulate in one large form information about your current fleet, your utility contact, and the plans that you have thinking about the future about your fleets. The reason I have it in here, even though it looks overwhelming, is that NREL is an amazing resource. They are offering free assistance to schools in their planning for electric transition. They will help with things like which bus makes sense for me, which routes that we have make sense, what kind of chargers do I need? Some of the people there actually are and have been fleet managers, so they have personal experience with making this kind of transition, understand the questions that you legitimately have and how to work through them. So I've got this form up, even though it looks big, because to let you know of their amazing resource and their ability to help. And at the end of the slideshow, I've got a list of resources, including their link. Next slide, please. This is just the rest of that form. Next slide, please. So here are some resources for you. The first two are just listservs that I suggest you sign yourselves up for if you're not already, so that you will be kept up to date by EPA regarding this round and future rounds of funding. The second is the Illinois EPA VW funding, the source of Lyndall Schuster's River Trails buses and a number of others across the state already. And then some really excellent resources that we are familiar with for making your plans. The Alliance for Electric School Buses is one that we are part of, but even better probably for you are the World Resource Institute resources. World Resources Institute also has one-on-one sessions. They will talk with a school district for 30 minutes to start with about your plans and about issues, questions that you have. They've got great resources on electric school buses. The second are more detailed information about the tax credits that I mentioned. There will be more updated, but there's sort of the background on those tax credits / direct pay options, which will become available. And then lastly, I have listed there the NREL link to the resources that I mentioned, that they can give great technical assistance. I tried to leave questions time so we can go through questions that you have. I realize I've whipped through a lot of information and you may have questions of aspects that I didn't cover. So please shoot with any questions you've got, John.
Susan, I know there was correspondence between you and the District 97 superintendent regarding this circulator bus idea. I don't recall all the details. Is that something that you can address?
So I've started to deal with that question, but frankly, I don't have a complete answer. Let me
Okay.
tell you what I can tell. The question, as I understood, it had to do with a district that doesn't own its own buses, uses a contractor, sort of like Lindell, but wants to add a after-school route with an electric bus, and we're interested in that possibility. There's a couple of tweaks to that. One is, will the school bus that they want to obtain serve any of the regular routes, or is it only an after-school route? For this program, the basic goal of this EPA program is to replace existing buses that are, for instance, diesel, with new electric, for instance, for the regular service for kids. So if the district wants to or can find a way that the contractor replaces one of the existing buses, you know, applies for this funding with the school or on behalf of the school to replace a current old bus, and then they could make an arrangement that that bus could also be used for after school, I think that could work. I don't think if it's a bus that is only to be used after school, that will meet the criteria under the amount of time that the bus has to have been used and the whole replacement scheme. And I started working through this when the question came yesterday, but I didn't feel I had a complete answer. That's as far as I've gotten on it so far.
Okay, thank
I'm
you.
glad to work through it more, but that's as far as I got since I saw that question yesterday.
Thank you for that. Can you share the slide deck when you're done?
Of course, glad to.
Thank you.
And Colleen's got it.
Susan, do you know on the federal grant, if you've already applied, can you just take the same application and apply it to the next one, or do you have to copy and paste and go through it all again?
I think you're going to have to copy and paste. I don't think you can literally use the previous one. And let me mention, that's really good you brought that up, Lyndall. There are a couple of new tweaks in this year's rebate round, which also would mean one can't just send the same one in. So a couple of things that are important to note that have changed. One is that, and these are based on experiences from last year's rebate round. One of the things that EPA experienced and that schools experienced, sadly, was that for some school districts, their utility was not really ready to help them. And in some cases, and Lyndall, you sort of alluded to this, you're in a sort of advanced situation in that you're going for a vehicle to grid situation. And you mentioned that ComEd, you know, while you've got the charger, ComEd hasn't yet got set up for your bi-directional charging. Some utilities weren't even ready for like an upgrade needed if a school district didn't have the capacity to even do a regular charging. So
yeah, I mean, one of the things that surprised us was we had to upgrade our electric, and we did it with a transformer. We were able to do it that way because we only had one, but I have heard from others that, you know, they had to do a whole upgrade to the electrical system.
And that sometimes has to deal with where the buses are stored compared to where the school's electric service is. So that's really a case-specific thing. Mm-hmm. But because of these cases that happened across the country where some utilities weren't ready to be there to help their school district, there's a new form that's required this year. And it's a fairly simple form, but it does require it to be submitted with the application. And it would be a form that would have the utility basically saying, and the school district basically signing a form saying, we've talked, we have an estimate of the costs of any upgrades needed on the utility side. And, you know, we understand that the school district is applying and we understand that this is what's going to be required. Okay. So that's to try to avoid future problems where hasn't been enough interaction between the school district and the utility. So Lyndall, that's one of the changes that's important. Another new form that's required has to do with the school board. And Lyndall, you mentioned that, for instance, you had gone to your school board.
Yeah, I've taken it to the school board. When we applied for the federal grant, I let the school board know. In that case, they didn't have to approve it, but are they required now to approve it?
They're not required to approve it if the school district is applying on their own, but there is a form saying they're aware of the application and they're and that they know what's being applied for. And who will own the buses.
Okay.
If, for instance, a third party, let's say a manufacturer or a dealer or the company that one uses, the contractor, if they're applying on behalf of the school district, they would have to have there's a different form saying that the school board approves of the fact that this company is applying on its behalf. And that form, so that wouldn't be required in your case, Lyndall, but in the case of a school district where this came up last year, where unfortunately, a few applications were submitted on behalf of school districts where the school district apparently wasn't aware that it was being done on their behalf. So that's a form we hope there aren't
That doesn't happen.
surprises, but that's what happened. A few cases across the country.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not quite sure how to do this if I have to go out to bid and I end up with a different provider.
Is the
That's going to
timing
really
such-
complicate things.
Yeah. Is the timing such that you're going to have to go out to bid before an application, or what's
Yes, I got to start. Well, I'm going to go out to bid in December. By January 31st, I may know who the company would be, but I might not. I wouldn't have it approved by the board yet. So I'm not quite sure how to do that one. So if anybody has any ideas for me, let me know.
You know what, Lyndall, I would suggest putting a question in to cleanschoolbus.gov. I can't even remember if that's the correct name. There's a place you can submit questions and they will answer it in the FAQ. The other thing is, are you connected with Tony Maeda or Frank Acevedo or Alexis Hosny here at?
I listened to the webinar there was a webinar yesterday.
Yeah.
I've been signing up for those webinars.
That's great, but I would suggest, and I would be glad to connect you with them to literally ask that question, like, here I am, I have to go out to bid, the timing is X, what do you suggest? And see what they suggest. Say, you've got a bus already, you know you're interested again, and here you are on this timing conundrum, and what do they suggest? Because it certainly shouldn't prevent you from applying. It's just, I don't have an easy answer.
Yeah, I might have to put it into my bid or something, is what I was thinking.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So I'm glad I don't have an easy answer, but I'm glad to try to think through.
Yeah, maybe and then I just changed I don't know if I have to put in the application who the company is, but then I just changed the buses that we're getting rid of to the new company.
Yeah, and they have allowed, when there's been changes in which buses would be scrapped, they have been open to that.
Okay.
Situations in the past.
So then, I was thinking of maybe getting around it that way somehow, putting it in the bid. And if I'm really lucky, my board will not make me go out to bid, but it didn't sound that way last night.
Yeah. So welcome. I see Sheila Johnson is on. Sheila, glad you've joined us. Do you have questions or things we can help with? Looks like you're muted, Sheila. John, are there questions that you've got or things we could help with?
No, I think you answered a lot of the questions, and I'll be able to go back through the slide deck and take a look at some of the resources and look at that. I have a meeting actually shortly here with Sheila Johnson, so I'll catch up with her.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yep. But no, I appreciate all the resources, and I'll reach out to Lyndall if I have any kind of specific questions about how things went over there. But I sure appreciate all the information.
Very happy to provide it, and feel free, John. My contact information I think was on there. Feel free if there's other things that come up that we might be able to help with to reach out.
John, are you outsourced for your transportation?
We are.
Who to who?
You know, to be honest, I'm still so new, I don't know. I'm drawing a blank on it right now, but I will look into what we have available. And one of the things we were looking at doing was maybe a community bus after school runs. So I'll have to look through that and how that's contracted and who that's contracted through as well.
So I think, John, on that, if your contractor, it's worth having a conversation with your contractor about their willingness to apply, either on your behalf or you applying, if you can figure out a way to have the same bus serve a regular route and your after-school route. And the important thing for you to know about this is that whoever applies in the end has the power. So there's reasons why if you can, you want to be the applicant as opposed to having the contractor be the applicant. But it may be necessary, depending on your arrangement with them, it may be necessary for they to be the applicant. But in that case, make sure to talk to them about who's going to own the bus in the end.
Okay.
And like in Lyndall's situation, she's talking about this bi-directional charging, and it's going to be important that she owns the charger and that eventually ComEd helps River Trails get revenue from it. And again,
Super.
glad to talk that through with you. Sorry.
I appreciate the help. Thank you.
All right, I think that's it for today then. Susan, thank you. Lyndall, thank you. I will, we have been recording this. I started it just a couple seconds late. But I will save the recording and send it out to everybody else on the C4 list that had RSVP'd and also not to this call, so that we can try to get as much information out as possible. And I'll include, Lyndall, if it's all right with you, I'll include your information along with Susan's. So if anybody has any questions, they can follow up with both of you afterwards.
Sounds good.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Colin.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you very
everyone.
much, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.